YouTube and on the global Pranic Healing website. So for those who are watching or joining from there, welcome. I'm happy to see your faces. Thank you for turning your video on. Atma Namaste, everyone. Hello. Before we begin, if those who are here with me on Zoom, maybe you could open the chat. It's down at the bottom for those who are new to Zoom. And just maybe let us know what your name is and where you are joining from. We have people from Amsterdam, from Malaysia, from India, from Bali, welcome, from Dubai, from Singapore, from India, from Rome, from Bangalore, from Bali, from Sweden, from Kolkata, from Tagaytay in the Philippines. We were just there in, well, feels like not too long ago, we were there in January during the volcano eruption. The earth is speaking to us in all sorts of ways right now. Hi, Fanny and Leo. Welcome. So for those who are meeting me for the first time, Atma Namaste, my name is Deborah Quibell, and I am a senior instructor for the Institute for Inner Studies and had the blessing of being with the founder, Master Choa Kok Sui, for many years. And this experience of learning with him and being in this community has transformed my life in unimaginable ways, as I'm sure it has for many of you that are joining here today. And so on behalf of myself, I would like to thank the Institute for Inner Studies for beginning this initiative. When I saw the name, I was deeply moved, the Oneness Project, because I think in times like this, we are really being called to look at the ways that we are part of a big web of interconnectivity and how our actions cannot exist in isolation. What we do has an effect on so many different levels. And for those of us that have studied pranic healing, we know this. What we do on an energetic level absolutely impacts what someone experiences on a physical level, right? Or on an emotional level, even on a spiritual level. And so I'm really moved that we're coming together in this way during this time. I believe it's what's being asked of us. And so I want to first congratulate you for showing up. Whatever time it is in the world for you, you listened to a part of you that wants to move deeper in conversation, a part of you that feels called to awaken and transform yourself. And so you're not on Netflix right now. Maybe you will be later, and that's also good. We have to keep a balance. You're not on Facebook. You're not on Instagram. Congratulations, you're here in spiritual community to talk about things that are really important right now. So I'm honored to guide this session. Thank you for showing up here. So you may choose how you view, those of you who know Zoom, up in the upper right corner, you can choose speaker view if you want to just see me while I'm speaking during the session. And later, maybe towards the end, I will invite you to move to gallery view again, so you may see the other souls and people who are here with us. And so I'm gonna pin my video. So now I believe you might see me And then the rest of the small things will appear up in the top. And I'm going to ask, just in case, I know Hangama is here with us. She's helped to organize all of this with the Institute. Hangama, if anything happens with connection, please just send me a message on WhatsApp and I can make sure to reconnect or to change connection. But we've done everything we can to make sure we have a good line. So as we begin, I would really like to start with the practice of centering. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to just close your eyes and become a little bit more present to being here in this moment together. So first, just become lovingly and gratefully aware of your body. Feel your body in contact with the chair that's underneath you, that is supporting you. And feel this chair in the room that you are in this moment, in this time. And call yourself to become a little bit more present with your body, with your heart, with your mind. Allow yourself to connect to the part of you that called you to be here. And as you are aware of your body on the chair in this room, I invite you to become aware of the room within your home. To become aware of your home within your neighborhood. To become aware of your neighborhood within your city. To become aware of your city in your country. To become aware of your country in your continent. And to become aware of your continent within the world. And you, a point of light among many, many, many points of light. And you, a seeking heart, a flame among many other seeking hearts, a flame, who are searching for awakening and transformation, for goodwill. And may we offer this session together for those who are less privileged in this time, who don't have access to a computer, who don't have access to a home, who may be sick or suffering, who may be grieving. We offer the benefits and love of this session to all of those who are not privileged as we are. Or who are giving themselves on the front lines of this crisis. You may bring your hands into prayer position in front of your heart. Thank you. to the part of you that called you here, and thank you to each of you for showing up, for listening. Atma Namaste. So you may open your eyes. And I would like to start our time together by telling you a story. So our session for today is on coping with overwhelm. And I'm going to tell you a story about an American woman who lives in Italy. And let's just say, for the sake of the story, her name is Deborah. And when coronavirus came to Italy in such a big way, Deborah every day kept having conversations with her husband. Some of you may know him. About wanting to leave Italy. And so every day I would wake up, and sometime during the day I would discuss with my husband, I think we should go. I think we should leave. Things are getting bad. I think we should leave. And every time I would bring up this discussion, he would look at me very calmly and start asking questions in return. Where would we go? I'm not sure. Why would we go? I'm not sure. If we go, there are many situations we have to face. We have to be on an airplane. We have to potentially be quarantined wherever we go. And so every day we would have a similar version of this discussion until one day he asked me, he said, we have a safe home here. We have a home, we're safe. Do you feel more at home in America, for example? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, do you feel more at home in Amsterdam, where we used to live? And I said, no, I don't. And he basically, in that moment, I realized that I didn't want to leave Italy. I just wanted to leave. I didn't want to accept. I didn't want to look around. I didn't want to acknowledge the pain and the suffering and the difficulty that was around us in Italy, but actually everywhere in the world. And I realized in that moment that I was not searching for a place to go in the time of this virus. I was searching for home within myself, and I was looking for home. And my first thought when I realized this was, my gosh, after 15 years of very regular meditation and spirituality, how have I not established this sense of home within me? Right? This is one of the purposes of our spiritual practice. And at first I started to feel even a little bit frustrated, ashamed. I felt like my practice in some way had let me down. And I started to feel like there were feelings on top of the feelings, and we'll talk about this as we go through today. And this feeling of being able to even acknowledge that I was searching for home, to look at what it was I was avoiding, all of this was a benefit of my spiritual practice. All of this were the fruits of what I had done previously, because I had the courage to look within myself. I had the courage to admit that, okay, this is not about leaving Italy. This is about my emotional and spiritual response to this pandemic that we find ourselves in. And just being able to say that and to look at that is a benefit of having a spiritual practice or a spiritual ground, right? Because otherwise I could have fled Italy and found myself in America or in Amsterdam feeling the exact same way inside, wondering, should we be here? Should we go somewhere else? But then we just simply jump from place to place without ever looking at what it is we're truly searching for, what it is that makes us feel at home and safe within ourselves. And so our session for today is on coping with overwhelm. And I think every single one of us at one point or another in this time that we find ourselves in has felt overwhelmed. And that might show up for you in a very different way than it will for someone else. But I think each of us can say that this is an overwhelming time. And so I want today to focus on kind of 4 major points or pillars. And the first is to look. We'll go into each one in more detail, and even I might guide a few short practices. So if you're taking notes or if you like to write things down, the first is to look. The second is to befriend. The third is to recall. And the fourth is to transform. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these and look at the gifts that are within these internal movements. Okay, because I look at each of these as a movement that we can make internally. Okay, and so the first is to look. So the first thing is to look around. This is one of the things I was avoiding doing. When you look around right now, it's a difficult time collectively. I would venture to say it is a time of darkness or suffering in our collective experience, right? And I think sometimes when we look around, the image that comes to me is one of being in the fog, right? It's foggy. We don't know what is on the other side of this. We don't know how and when the fog will actually lift. And so what I realized in my own process and what I can offer to you here is that I was searching for clarity and certainty amidst the fog. And this creates more overwhelm. So when we feel overwhelmed, we can't see what's around us. There's a lot of uncertainty. For clarity or for certainty, all of a sudden we find ourselves more overwhelmed. So when we look around spiritually, part of our practice is just to accept that there is suffering and this is a dark time. I remember and not look for it to be any other time than what it is. I remember one time I was in a Native American sweat lodge. So it's a practice that's done. They build this structure and then they bring a lot of hot coals and stones into this structure, which is completely dark. And the heat increases and your body sweats and it's a lot of purification. And I remember the first experience I had in one of these Native American sweat lodges. They make sure they block out all the light. So when you go in, it is completely dark. And this experience of complete darkness was psychologically overwhelming for me. And I remember I looked along the floor where the structure met the earth, and I found one point of light that was shining through from the outside into the sweat lodge. And that was enough to dispel some of my panic or overwhelm of being in this darkness. But I didn't look for the light to just take over and for the darkness to go away and all of a sudden I could see everything within the sweat lodge. Because obviously the conditions were of darkness. I can't change these conditions. These were the conditions that were set up around us. But I could find one small point of light, and that was enough to hold me through the darkness, that there is light. And so when you look around and you see a lot of darkness, you see a lot of suffering, what helps us to manage with overwhelm is to find the small points of light. I think it was the famous TV personality in the US, Mr. Rogers. And somebody asked him, you know, when you are going through a hard time, how do you cope? And he said, my mom always told me to look for the helpers, that in every difficult situation, there are people suffering, but there are also people helping. And when we look for the helpers, our faith and our sense of care for one another is restored. And so not trying to make this time any lighter, accepting we are in a collective time of darkness and suffering, but finding the points of light, the small moments of, you know, light, of care, of love, and holding on to those until the darkness, the fog starts to clear. Because eventually I did come out of the sweat lodge and the darkness was no longer all around me. But in that moment, I needed something to hold on to. So to look around is the first, okay? Sometimes we don't want to look at what's happening around us because it's overwhelming and it's painful. But there are also a lot of beautiful things happening. And holding both right now is really important. So looking around, and the second is looking within. There's some facts here that most of us know, which is that, number one, humans don't like discomfort. Is that just me? Am I alone in this? Number two, that we will often go to great lengths to avoid discomfort. Again, just me? So humans don't like discomfort, and we will often go to great lengths to avoid discomfort. Okay. However, some more facts for you. When we avoid our big feelings, when we try to push them away or push them down or pretend that they are not there, what happens is that we repress something that is within us, and that emotion only builds up more energy to explode in often surprising and unwanted ways. Have you experienced this if you think back, right? For example, you read something in the news that feels really overwhelming and starts to evoke a sense of anxiety within you. But anxiety is not comfortable. It's not an area you want to go towards. You don't like anxiety. And so you push the anxiety aside and you divert your mind to do something else. Suddenly, a few hours later, you're with someone you care about very much, maybe your family, your child, your husband, your wife, and they say something and you explode. And afterwards you look back and you think, why did I just respond or react that way? Often repressed emotions, when they release, will feel like a surprising experience. You don't understand why you behaved in a particular way, but you did. And this has to do with what often we put aside. And it's like, if you think about it, if you push like a ball underwater, right? And you push it down, down, down underwater, only with more force will that ball pop up from the water, okay? And so in pranic healing language, those who have studied and trained in pranic healing, when we repress emotions, what happens? It becomes stuck or congested energies, right? So psychologically, it becomes a repressed emotion, which doesn't go away. it might temporarily go away. We might be able to distract ourselves. But usually when we push something down, it only gains more energy and charge to then kind of come back and be there in a big way. Maybe it's before you sleep, right? Sometimes you find yourself all of a sudden filled with anxiety that through the day you were able to manage. But maybe through the day you were continuously pushing this aside. So it was building up. And when the mind starts to relax, the emotion surfaces again, right? And so if you know what it is you're feeling, great. I want you to look at it. Don't run away from it. Try not to avoid the big, hard, uncomfortable feelings. Okay. And I'm going to teach the next sections are about, what we do with it when we look at it. So, but first we have to see it, and we have to be able to name it and to say, okay, what is it that's causing me to feel overwhelmed right now? And is it fear? Is it despair? Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it uncertainty? Is it anger? So when you look at an emotion and you name it, number one, you recognize that a part of you is able to look and to name it. So immediately, even unconsciously or subconsciously, you become aware of the one who observes. You become aware of the looker. And you are not as defined or identified with that emotion anymore, right? Because if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, if a part of you can look at the anxiety and say, hello, this is anxiety. I'm feeling anxious right now. All of a sudden you have recognized that you are not the anxiety, because part of you is able to look at it and observe it and to name it. If you were totally and only that, right, then that's just your whole reality. You are anxiety. And so you cannot actually observe this or name it from outside of it. Okay. Number two, the charge of whatever that emotion is all of a sudden dispelled. Okay. If you think about it, it's like if there was a stranger living in your house, because the psyche, our mind, is like our house. Okay. So if there's a stranger living in your house, number one, imagine if you went through your whole day ignoring or avoiding admitting that that person was even there. You would never do this, right? It sounds ridiculous to us because there's somebody there. You better look at them and acknowledge that they're there. But we don't do this often with ourselves, with the voices that kind of live within us. Okay, so also, if someone is in your house and you know nothing about them, right? You might start assuming all sorts of weird things, right? Haven't you had the experience where you are maybe busy or sleeping and you hear a sound in your home? And if you don't go look at what's causing that sound, all of a sudden your mind can think of the most crazy things that are causing that sound. And you even play out these fantasies or imaginings about what that could be or is, right? All of a sudden, when you look at it and you name it, you think to yourself, oh, that wasn't someone coming in my house, with a club ready to take all my things. It was a mouse in the cupboard. What in your mind felt like such a danger and felt like such a threat to you, when you look at it, all of a sudden you realize, okay, this is a mouse. Is it comfortable to have a mouse? No, but at least I know what's causing the disturbance in my house. So if something is causing a disturbance in your mind and in your aura, imagine the craziness of humans that we just don't want to know. We look away. But if we look at it, we can say, okay, this is fear. I have to work with this because I know if I ignore it, it doesn't go away. If you ignore the mouse in your house, it's just going to probably breed and create other mice in your home. Right? But if you look, you can think, okay, how can I handle this situation? What is it? What are the tools that I have to clear or help to look and acknowledge what's making the ruckus and the disturbance in myself, in my home? Okay. Now, sometimes when we're overwhelmed, we don't know what we're feeling. Have you had this experience? So hard to do these talks online because I want like response. But when we're feeling overwhelmed, someone says, "What's wrong?" You're like, "I don't know. I'm just off." And they say, "Well, can you try to name it?" No, I don't know how I'm feeling. I'm just overwhelmed. Shut up. Leave me alone. I'm going in my room. I'm going to watch a movie. And then we think we've dealt with it. But again, we've just distracted ourselves away from it. And so I want to guide us now in a short exercise to help move us into acknowledging and looking at what we might be holding. Okay, so does that sound like a good plan? So it's a very short body scan exercise because when we are stuck in the mind, it can help us to move our awareness into the body. Okay, when we're feeling overwhelmed mentally, sometimes just moving into the body and trusting the wisdom of the body helps us. And so what we're going to do is kind of direct the mind or ourselves, our awareness through the different parts of the body, noticing areas that you feel icky, stuck, congested, pain, and then move into that and try to see, what might be there within you. Okay. So I'm going to guide this, something you can do also when you're not sure how you're feeling. And then we'll talk about the next, pillars after we do this practice. Okay. So close your eyes. Find a comfortable position in your body. Just gently become aware of your breathing. And I want you to very, very slowly, without any rush, just very slowly with your awareness, starting at the crown of your head, just scan the body, moving from the crown of your head very, very slowly down and noticing any area where the mind or the awareness becomes stuck, or an area in your body that feels tight or congested or painful. And take your time. It might be some place that you really don't expect, that you typically wouldn't assume to find anything there. So take your time to scan. When you find an area, you may imagine like a dark or grayish cloud, something that is present to that part of your body. You, with your loving eyes, you look at the emotion, you look at the energy, the cloud. And you begin to walk towards it. As you walk towards it, you may even, as you would a companion or someone you're meeting, you may greet it. You may say, hello, I'm coming closer. You are here. And allow yourself to kind of enter into that grayish cloud of energy or emotion within you. You standing in the center of that emotion, of that energy. You're kind of looking around. You may even start to ask, who are you? What is this feeling? Sometimes you immediately have an answer. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's anger, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's despair. Allow yourself to notice, who is here? Who is it that you are, with right now? What is this energy? What is this emotion? And once you've kind of felt into it, you may just gently take a deep breath and open your eyes. Now, if you have something to write with, this might be a moment that you write down, okay, in my throat, I felt an energy of fear. In my shoulder, I felt trauma. So if you can start to identify, usually there might be a mixture of emotions, but usually there's one primary emotion that's louder or stronger than the others. And so you start to come to know who is within you. So we look around and we look within. So we start to know, okay, what are the emotions that are causing me overwhelm? Because if we don't know who's there, our mind can imagine much, much worse scenarios than probably the reality of what it is we're experiencing. Okay, and we give so much more power to that emotion by allowing it to exist without noticing how it is affecting us or how it is dictating our thoughts or choices or behaviors. Okay, so the second kind of pillar is to befriend. Number one, to befriend yourself. So before we befriend the emotion, you have to befriend yourself. I remember one day I was traveling in India with the founder of modern Pranic Healing and Arhatic yoga, Master Choa Kok Sui. His picture is here. And everybody, we were in a hotel room, and everybody left the room. And it was me and Master sitting in the living room area. And he said to me, why don't we do some healing? And in that moment, I thought, my first response was, oh my gosh, what an opportunity to have a healing from Master Choa one-on-one. And it was like, I was so elated. And then immediately my second response was, holy SHIT, he is going to see every single one of my weaknesses, negative energies, everything that I have stored in my chakras and aura. Can I say no? And of course, A, he's probably already seen them. B, I didn't say this. This was my internal dialogue. Master Choa looked at me in that moment and he said, don't worry, we're all evolving. Come, let's do healing. Don't worry, we're all evolving. Come, let's do healing. And I'm teary because in that moment, all the shame that I had been feeling was broken. And I realized how on the spiritual path, we are so hard on ourselves. We think that if we have these big emotional experiences or obstacles or struggles, that we've failed in some way, that we are not pure enough, that we haven't done enough self-healing, that we, our meditation practice hasn't paid off. We have all of these stories on the spiritual path that keep us in a place of not feeling sufficient and not feeling good enough. And we have a lot of shame about the emotions. And so the emotions are often not the problem. The problem is the emotions that we have about the emotions. So we have fear, but then we feel ashamed, or we feel scared about having fear. Or we have depression and we feel somehow insufficient or not good enough because we feel depressed. And whenever I feel this, I remember those words from my teacher, which is, we are all evolving. And I don't have to be illumined and enlightened right now. This is okay. I'm a good person. I have many good things and good qualities, and I'm allowed to have big emotions. And so we have to befriend ourselves. If you think of one of your closest spiritual friends coming to you filled with anxiety, you would never say to them, well, you haven't done enough purification. Why don't you go and, try to get rid of this, because, why you meditate for so long? But those are the conversations we have in our head for ourselves. And so we have to befriend ourselves. You have to extend love and mercy and compassion to yourself first. Okay. And once you do that, and I really encourage you, spread it all over your aura. Maybe every day you sit down and you close your eyes and you imagine yourself under a waterfall of I am good enough, under a waterfall of I'm evolving, I'm a good person. And if I have anxiety, if I have fear, if I have depression, it's okay. I'm a good person and I'm learning. And these are also the ways that I transform. These are also my gifts. These are also my teachers, right? Instead of, I'm not doing enough, I should be meditating more, I haven't purified, why am I feeling depressed? All the other spiritual practitioners are not feeling depressed. They probably are. They're just not talking about it. Why do I feel so much fear? No one else does. They probably do. They're just not talking about it. So what happens when we do show up and say, yeah, this has been hard, right? So befriend yourself. And after we befriend ourselves, then the movement is to befriend the feeling. Okay, so let's say it's fear. let's say it's anxiety. Can you give this fear and this anxiety a shape? Can you give it a name? Can you give it a form, or allow it to be a figure of some kind in your imagination? And it could take the shape of an animal. It could take a shape of a cloud. Don't kind of hold yourself to what this should be. It's an exercise of the imagination where you say, okay, fear, you're here. Now, I would like to feel or see what this fear could look like. What is a figure or a form that you can give to this fear? Or maybe it's even a name. You call the fear, Freddy the fear, whatever. And all of a sudden, when you give this energy or emotion within you, and sometimes it can actually be done also with a sense of humor, right? And for a long time, I had to do a lot of work with the critic that I have, like a very critical voice. And I just, I named her something totally bizarre. I think it was Kathy the critic. And it's like, oh, here's Kathy again. And it helped me identify when that emotion or that fear appears. And all of a sudden, that doesn't consume me anymore. I can relate to it. So I can say, Kathy, the critic, you're here again. What do you have to say? Get it out. Welcome back. And all of a sudden you have something, you have an other to relate to, right? Because only when we give something a form or a figure do we have something we can be in relationship with. And the most important thing in working kind of psychologically and spiritually with our big emotions is being in relationship with them. Being in relationship with them, because usually there's gold within the lead. Usually, right, that's alchemy, turning lead into gold. Usually within the dirt, the darkness, there's something very valuable for us to discover about ourselves. And the only way to get an emotion to talk is to befriend it, right? Think about the most meaningful conversations you've had in your life. They're usually with people that you're very friendly with. So if you become very friendly with these big emotions within you, suddenly they will start to tell you many things about why they're there, what they have come from, or where they have come from, maybe what they have to teach you. And you start to, in this relationship, understand they're not the monsters that we originally felt that they were, that there's another dialogue that can happen. And when you do this, you, again, are in dialogue to the emotion. So who is the you that is in relationship to the emotion? And what wisdom does that observer of emotion have to say as well? Because the emotion, like say fear, is not the only voice within you. There's also probably a very strong voice of faith, or a very strong voice of hope or love. And if you bring love in dialogue with fear, interesting. I wonder what would happen in that conversation, what they would have to say to each other. Or if you embody fear and talk to love, what will love have to say to you? Right? I think I was listening to a wonderful talk by Elizabeth Gilbert, the writer, and she has a spiritual practice where she writes a letter to love every day. And it starts usually with something like, hey, I need you. Dear love, I need you. I'm feeling immensely overwhelmed and scared right now. And then what does love have to say in return? Right? And maybe to be honest, I actually write out a dialogue. I actually speak to the figure of the emotion about why it's here, what it has to say. And at first it feels like you're making it up. So if you do this after this call or sometime, you're going to feel like, this is so cheesy, I'm making this up. And that's normal. And then at some point, something takes over and you're able to feel some energy of wisdom come through, or a lesson or a teaching, like, oh, I got it. And there's usually a change in energy that happens at that point in the dialogue. So if you feel like you're making it up, keep going until you feel you've entered into something and that energy is really speaking to you. Okay. So the minute we come to know and befriend a feeling, the feeling becomes less threatening, becomes more of a known entity, something that we almost have a sense of humor in relating to. Okay. The third pillar is to recall. So when we're feeling overwhelmed, it's really, so if you think about it, the first is to look. So to look with loving eyes. The second is to befriend. So to befriend with a loving heart. And the third is to recall. So to recall with a loving mind. So humans are immensely resilient. We are right now in this time, we're not the first humans to experience hardship, and we won't be the last. And what has helped me so much is to think of examples in history of humans finding hope and light in the darkest of times. And when I feel tempted to, sometimes, of course, we need to read fiction and other things, but I've been picking up so many books from figures that speak to this, and reading stories of hope and triumph. Some of the most moving have been revisiting the writings of Viktor Frankl. Some of you may know his work. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was an Austrian psychotherapist who went through 4 concentration camps and survived. And he wrote this book in 9 days when he came out, and it's Man's Search for Meaning. And he said that essentially, in any situation, our search for meaning is what keeps us alive, is what keeps us going. So what does this time mean for you? What does this time mean for us? And how searching for that meaning within the darkness helps us to see it through. And also remembering to recall, right? To recall that we are not powerless. And sometimes overwhelm is caused by empathy. It's called empathetic overload. So we are sensitive beings, many of us who have stepped onto the spiritual path, who have studied healing, and we absorb the energy and suffering of the people around us. But I think instead of going towards empathy, the practice now is to go towards compassion. Because when you are empathetic to the point of absorbing the pain of other people around you, you can no longer be of service. You become another person that needs help. So instead, moving to compassion and remembering kind of the foundational principles of the Institute for Inner Studies in this school, right? Which is that physical existence is not the only one. And that energy moves in both directions. Okay, and so sometimes we start to feel the suffering and the pain of the world around us, right? And what has helped me so much is to remember that, and I'm going to guide you through this practice now as one of our ways to end, but that if I can feel the pain and suffering of others, they can feel my love. And if I can feel the darkness and the despair of others, they can feel my light. And that we can send these energies out and they will have an impact on many different levels. So instead of absorbing all this pain and suffering and then suffering even more ourselves, we move into a more empowered place of compassion where we say, okay, how can I be of service in this time? And just moving into helping others, you will be helped. I was going through a period of incredible darkness in my personal life, and Master Choa was teaching a class in California, and I was with him. And he asked how I was doing, and I was very honest. I told him I was really struggling, and these were the reasons why. And I thought he would give me some really profound spiritual advice and a big secret teaching or a meditation or a mantra that I was supposed to do every day, and it would help me feel better. All he said to me was, go back and heal others. As you heal others, you will be healed. Don't sit and soak in your own misery and your own suffering. As you help alleviate the suffering of others, your own suffering is alleviated. That was it. That was all the guidance. And I went back and I focused on healing other people, helping other people in whatever way I could. And sure enough, it completely changed my own experience of suffering that I was going through. So I want to guide us in this exercise of sending energy and moving out of empathy and empathetic overload, because empathy is not a bad thing, but when it becomes overloaded, it becomes that, not such a healthy thing. So, and moving instead into active compassion and active love and active service. So I'm going to invite you again, if you're kind of writing or doing anything, put your things down and close your eyes. And come to a really calm, easy, and open breath. Being aware of your heart center, that angel of love within you who cares so deeply, who loves immensely. You may, again, stay with that easy, open breathing. You can just mentally repeat this with me as you're aware of your heart and maybe also aware of your crown. The top of your head, the center of illumination, of divine love. If I can feel your suffering, you can feel my love. Imagine the energy of love descending down into your body, into your aura, and radiate energies of love to all people who are suffering. If I can feel your suffering, you can feel my love. You may imagine this love enveloping them, helping to soothe the suffering within them. You are loved. You are loved. You are loved. If I can feel your suffering, you can feel my love. I have so much love for you. I have so much love for all. If I can feel your pain, you can feel my comfort. If I can feel your pain, you can feel my comfort. Again, imagine comforting energies radiating from within you, from around you. Going to those who are in pain, who are grieving, may they be comforted. May you be comforted. May you remember you are cared for, you are loved. Take a few kind of deep, easy, slow breaths. And gently just kind of come to your eyes opening again. It's easy to stay in that practice for a longer time. So if you start to feel overwhelmed by the suffering or the fear around you, just using like a simple mantra practice like that and radiating the capacities of your heart, because the capacities of your heart are not just to, kind of drown in the suffering of others. The capacity of your heart is to serve and to love and to care deeply. And we can do this through energy. We can do this through physical support. We can do this through tithing, giving to those in need. Doing sessions like this where we come together and talk about these things is a way of me being in service and in love with all of you. I'm reading some messages. Thank you. I love you all so much as well. To remember that these are the moments that we have been practicing for. These are the moments that we've been practicing for. If we have a meditation practice, if you have a spiritual practice, why do we practice? We practice so we can be of love and service to those who are in need and those who are suffering. And what a wonderful time, but now to put this into practice and into service. And, Viktor Frankl, the author I was telling you about who survived the concentration camps, I want to end with something he said. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. Between stimulus and a response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So there's something, right? Most of us here have probably practiced the meditation on twin hearts. And if you haven't, I encourage you to practice and look for it. It is the ground on which I stand in times like this. But Master Choa always taught us to be aware of the space, to be aware of the pause. Many spiritual teachers and traditions will tell you between two thoughts, there's a space. As you practice being aware of the space increases. You find more stillness. But in times of trauma, in times of tragedy, that's the stimulus, right? The external world we can't control. But often, if we be aware of the space between whatever it is that overwhelms us and how we respond to it, our freedom lies in the gap. Our freedom lies in the space. Pause before you react. If you don't pause, you react to overwhelm. If you pause, you respond. But if you don't pause, you react, right? There's a difference between reacting and responding. For those who know chakra language, reaction is usually solar plexus oriented. Response is usually heart oriented. So how am I responding? I am overwhelmed. Number one, I look at it, I name it, I befriend it. Hello, overwhelmed. You're back. And then the transformation happens on its own. I recall, wow, humans for all time have been overwhelmed. I'm not alone. Okay. And so I would love to invite those who are on Zoom in a moment to ask any questions. If you want to put them in the chat, I'll be happy. If you need to go, 3 o'clock was our sign off time. So you may, if you have other things on your agenda, you may exit graciously. I'm very grateful for your presence. And for those who have another 10, 15 minutes, I'm happy to stay and answer questions. So you may just put the questions in the chat if you would like. Let me go back to my gallery view so I can see some of you. Hi, beautiful faces. Hi, Tomasz. Hi, Roser. Hi, Yure. Hi, Sarah. So if you have a question, please type it in. I'd love to have a bit of a dialogue for a moment, or even just a sharing. So one of the questions, what to do with the fear of women's physical insecurities and violence. Do you mean, may I ask whoever, Rua, violence, do you mean the violence that we do to ourselves through how we think about our physical body, or sexual violence? This is a big question. So with fear, it's exactly, let's talk about the emotional component first. So the fear, because that's the emotion I recognize there, right? To look, if I look deeply, okay, there's fear. And to begin to understand, to know, to talk to this fear. Is it fear that is justified? Is it fear that is there through an experience of my own? Or is it a fear that has come in through maybe somewhat of an irrational fear? It's not as difficult as a scenario as I'm imagining it to be. So I would say first, come to know, of course, in answering this question, if there are dangerous situations that that you are in, I would really highly encourage you to seek help in ways that get you out of those situations. And then your work is in processing the fear and the trauma and moving into the tenderness of trauma. And often when we are in a traumatic situation, trauma is very much helped by the simple act of witnessing. So trying to find someone within your circle who can hold and witness whatever trauma that you've had or have experienced. We can't erase trauma. We go through very difficult things, and that causes this, fear. But we can be, kind of consumed by this fear if we don't kind of come to know it, to, again, speak to it. All the things I just went through, do the same thing for that fear, but maybe do it in a space with somebody that can hold a witnessing of that for you, that can hear your story. Often, people that have been through a lot of trauma, they find a lot of healing in telling their story, in speaking up, right? This was the energy behind the Me Too movement, that, many people came forward and started talking about their sexual abuse and their trauma, many women. And what happened in that was great collective healing, because those stories found other stories that were the same. And you start to think, I'm not the only one who's been through this. And together we have more ability to witness the trauma and suffering of one another and to speak up for it, right? Because being in community is what brings you more inner strength and courage, right? So finding the people that can help witness and tell the story, that will listen to your story. And then befriending the fear. Sounds crazy, but every time there's a big emotion, look at it, talk to it, and I would dare to say love it. Bring the energy of love in dialogue with that fear. What does it have to say? What does it have to teach you? How to get rid of worries from the mind and be happy or smile more. Many spiritual traditions will tell us that the search for external happiness is actually not the point. Joy, I would say, is a natural faculty that comes from developing the heart. So as you do practices to connect yourself to the heart, you find yourself inevitably becoming more joyful. But kind of trying to stay within this story or this narrative that we need to get rid of our worries of the mind. The mind is going to worry. Maybe when we are enlightened or when we reach some high state of illumination, we will be rid of worries. One of the natural tendencies of the mind is to think. And when we think of the future and we imagine sometimes terrible things. That's a normal part of the mind. So it's kind of recognizing like, there goes my crazy worrying mind again. Here we go. And then not necessarily believing all of those stories, right? And sometimes we actually just have to get out of the mind and move into the body or move into the heart. So you actually just say, I've followed this path before. How did that serve me? Right? How did that work out last time I did that? So can I try to choose another path of, okay, what's in my heart that I can bring into conversation with that worrying? Hope, faith, trust. Do I have this within me? I do. Interesting. So can I bring this kind of faith and trust within me to dialogue with the part of my mind that worries? Because I followed the worry path and it didn't serve me. So sometimes we don't even recognize it. We're just there. Now, if you recognize, here comes, Warren the worrier, you can recognize the part of you that worries and, get to know it. Why do I do this? Where do you come from? Like, stop taking over. I've got other people that want to talk, that want to come to the conversation, right? So I hope these are helpful. I can only offer some of what I've worked with kind of on my own path. Okay, let's do one or two more. For a teenager who has constantly been subject to bullying, how do we explain practicing the space in between stimulus and response? I have a real tender place in my heart for teenagers. One of the projects I might want to introduce is actually a podcast for teenagers, because I think so many of the seeds we experience as adults come from our adolescent or teenage years, because the emotions are raging. But any small training in like mindfulness, in pause, helps. I know there was a wonderful practice given by the monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and he takes this kind of jar and he puts a whole bunch of kind of sparkly things in the jar. And then he shakes up the jar and he puts it in front of the child, and the child has to wait for all of the particles and the sparkles to settle on the bottom before they can respond to something. So it gives the mind some pause, a moment to like, wow, look at those sparkles settling. But in that kind of calmness of the mind, they're able to then not immediately react, but instead respond. And, kind of labeling the big reactive emotions and saying, okay, I'm noticing you're angry, and let's talk about anger. And teenagers are great with imagination. So it's like, get them to sit down and talk to their big emotions. What do they have to say? And same things we're doing, I think, would be really, really great for teenagers. So let's do one more. Okay. This need in us says, I've been guilty of and have been at the receiving end of jumping at someone who needs help in the sense of trying to help them rise from mental suffering. In your experience, how do we avoid this tendency so that we would really be fully present and hold space for the person? So jump towards like a positive resolution. There is great spiritual practice, number one, in listening, and listening into where a person is and what they are ready for. And I remember one of my teachers saying, you can't want something for someone else more than they want it for themselves. So if they're not ready to do the work, you can't do it for them. And when I really meditated on that, I actually stopped trying to alleviate or change the suffering or decisions of other people unless they came and asked, or there was a real deep, open conversation. And I always lead with my own experience, because how I rise from mental suffering may be very different than how someone else rises from mental suffering. And so I can only offer what has worked for me. And if it hasn't worked for me, then I also have to examine in myself, is this my truth? Or am I regurgitating something that I read in a book or some spiritual teacher told me that I haven't actually experienced? Because there are many people who can tell you many, many, many things about suffering and can give you many spiritual teachings. They can teach you tools, they can give you mantras, meditations. And if it hasn't worked for them, then it's really, truly not experiential and maybe not truth. It's just a regurgitation of information. And so being really intimate with like what has worked for you. One of the only reasons I can talk about coping with overwhelm is I have been overwhelmed. I went through immense postpartum anxiety and insomnia after the birth of my second son. I went through huge post-traumatic stress syndrome after being sick and almost dying in India. And so I have been through big periods of overwhelm, and I can only offer whatever it is that helped me. And often that what I started with, like seeing it through, knowing you're in the fog, knowing you don't know when the fog's going to lift, but it will lift, is the place I return to. And looking for little sparks of light, like in that sweat lodge, I just found one little piece of light to hold on to. And then all of a sudden, the darkness is gone after a while. Sometimes it's just resilience and endurance. We don't have to transcend it. We just have to move through it. You know, especially in big times of big trauma, no amount of meditation, no amount of deep breathing was able to help me. I had to just see it through. I had to come to know it. I had to know that it was a dark night of the soul and that morning would come. But, you know, our great, you know, you study all traditions, many mystics and spiritual teachers are not strangers to suffering. So if we think that in order to be illumined or enlightened, we will be free of this and we won't have suffering, read the stories of Mother Teresa, read the stories of Saint Francis of Assisi, read the stories of the great mystics, and you will see a life of not ease, not happiness and smiles. You will find a life of great emotional suffering, and out of that came immense wisdom and light. Viktor Frankl, I'm going to end with this. He had a quote that said, "What is to give light must endure burning." That's a good one to write down. What is to give light must endure burning. You know, Carl Jung, the psychologist that I have my PhD in, he said, we can't take others further than we've been ourselves. So, but what is to give light must endure burning. So I'm going to end with a poem, an offering, and then we'll end the session. So the poem is called A Groundless Floor. It's from my book of poetry called Soulbird. And it's just my offering to end today. I'll be guiding a 3-part series in May on creativity and suffering with 2 other speakers. So you can find it that we start on Saturday. So if you feel moved to join, you may kind of join that through, you can find it on any of my social media channels and things. But I'd like to end with a poem called A Groundless Floor. So you may close your eyes maybe while I read this. There are moments in life when everything you've told yourself and everything you believe in fall out from underneath you. And you sit on a groundless floor, more tender inside than you ever thought possible, asking the one question you know we can never fully answer. Why? No matter what anyone tells you, don't press yourself into a perfect package of false compliance. You are allowed to throw stones at the sky, to write F-U-C-K in your journal 74 times and break into a million little pieces. You are allowed to ask for help and wonder deeply about the nature of suffering, even though you've read 1,000 books on the topic and are supposed to be the spiritual one. The truth is beyond what we can see, and until the veil has truly lifted, sometimes the blindfold can feel cruel and suffocating. This is all okay. Everything you feel is okay. You have not lost your faith. You are no less of a person. And when nothing else soothes you, apply this balm slowly to your swollen, cracking heart and know you are not alone. So we're not alone. And today has been just a living proof and example of that. And coming together and having these conversations is really a way to move in and through these times together. I posted this today, but it was Archbishop Desmond Tutu that said, despair draws us into ourselves and hope draws us into the arms of others. That hope depends on community and collaboration. And being connected. And so I encourage you through these times to find whatever it is that feeds you and keeps you finding these small points of light in the darkness to just pull us through. I'm grateful for being here. I'm grateful for all of you who joined and those who watched on streaming. I'm not sure, but my heart is very full, and I'm very grateful. So thank you all. I hope to see you again actually soon. So Atma Namaste. Thank you. Maybe we will look through the questions and answer some online as well if we didn't get to some. Namaste.